So we're back with Formula One again, and we're quickly going to discuss what went down during the qualifying of the Shanghai Grand Prix 2026. We meet to discuss that is Mustafa. You're welcome to another Formula One show.
All right, so this Shanghai was pretty surprising because Antonelli nipped George Russell. I think it's by maybe a tenth or so. And the biggest surprise, not really a big surprise if you've been watching our show, is that Hamilton out qualifies Leclerc, which is a big surprise. But it's not a big surprise because we saw it coming from free practice results. And when you look at the layout of the tracks, it's clear why Hamilton beat Leclerc. We know that Russell had a mechanical breakdown during qualifying, and that constrained him a little bit, and he probably would have run faster. Russell actually had the fastest time all weekend, even though because the qualifying times were slower than the times in qualifying for sprint. But nevertheless, there's a pattern that we're seeing both with Hamilton versus Leclerc and Hamilton and with Antonelli versus Russell, in which we're seeing that both of them are able to handle tight Hamilton and Antonelli compared to their teammate are able to handle tight meandering corners like sector one corners and also technical tight corners, the chicanes and everything better than their adversary. Not so much that they handle them better, but they're entering with higher minimum speeds. Um, in the case of Antonelli, he's entering with high minimum speeds and coming out ahead in both sectors, but usually in sector three, Russell catches up with him because Russell has a smoother, gentler entry into the corners, which over the long run with his mapping system gives him a bigger boost on the straights. But it didn't happen today. We'll talk about why that didn't happen. And in the case of Leclerc versus Hamilton, Leclerc, Ham, we know Leclerc likes to enter these corners at high speed and everything else, but because Leclerc likes a pointy car and also drives aggressively and fronty. Hamilton is beating him on the sector one and sector two with their tight corners and technical corners because Hamilton's style of driving is a little more stable than Leclerc's, and he's managing his tires better, front tires especially because Leclerc's front tires run out on the third the third sector of the race. Nevertheless, there was only like a microsecond. There was about a tenth of a second between Hamilton and Leclerc also. So we're talking about minor things right here. We're also talking about a track specific situation. So let's start off with Antonelli versus Russell first. If you look at the sectors, Antonelli was actually in the qualifying, he was faster in all three sectors, but marginally faster, and he built up a 0.12 lead. It's not surprising that he was faster in sector one and two, where he's carrying in more entry speed than Russell, as I said, because Russell breaks um, earlier than Antonelli and is smoother. So Antonelli's more aggressive with these slow speed corners and these winding corners, coming in with a higher minimum speed. But what happens is Russell gains back the time in sector three, partly because Antonelli's style is so aggressive that he wears out his front tires, and also he's losing time through the corners because even though he breaks later more aggressively and builds more momentum, he's a little bit ragged, and that raggedness comes from the fact that by breaking late and hard, it leads to some instability. So in general, what we're seeing in this track is clear evidence that uh, Antonelli is more talented than Russell. He can break later, he can break harder, he can carry more speed into the corners, whereas Russell has to take a more gradual approach, sort of like Piastri, and be more linear and measured about how he does things, and also has to pay a lot of attention to the minor details like um, preserving tires and everything. Now, interestingly enough, Russell was gaining almost 2/10 of a second on Antonelli in sector three in free practices and in the sprint quali, but in the qualifying he didn't have that. I'm going to say that's partly because he didn't get to warm up his tires and only do one lap to qualify, which is actually an amazing thing he did because he had a mechanical problem with his car, so he didn't have the same preparation that he usually has versus Antonelli. But nevertheless, we've seen this trend now. Antonelli is a speed demon in the likes of people like Verstappen and also people like Leclerc, who are not afraid to go into low speed corners with a pointy car with a lot of speed. He's just going to have to just work on fine-tailing his technique and dealing with issues like instability. Same thing that Verstappen had to deal with, instability that comes with that type of driving. And same thing with Leclerc. And that sort of peaky, unstable type of driving that Leclerc likes to do cost him time versus Hamilton. So this is a track specific thing. On other tracks, Russell and Leclerc will have advantages. But on this track, Hamilton definitely had an advantage because his car is more stable, is more set up for less pointy position, and has more rear stability, and actually is more stable through the corners. So, what are your thoughts first about Antonelli Folati?
I think it was a very good performance by Antonelli, and like you said, you called him a speed demon. I think that's a very apt description, comparing him to Verstappen as well as Leclerc. I mean, he was slamming on the brakes 3 to 5 meters later than George in turn 6 and 14. And you could see the way
Yeah,
he was driving. He was just fast. He wanted to be fast. He didn't want perfection. He just wanted to be quick. He was living on the edge, which is similar to the way Leclerc does his driving too. At such a
yeah,
precocious age, you would imagine that he has a lot of years ahead of him. So he looked a bit scrappy, if you watched it, but you could see he was fighting the car and making tiny corrections, even in the mid corners. Putting extra aggression, to carry the speed into the straights, and then he was able to uh, improve on what affected him in sprint qualifying. He was able to improve on that, in terms of the car running out of electric energy, the clipping that happened here. He was able to fix it. He perfectly timed his deployment. So he had full power right up until the braking zone of turn 14, which was good for him. So I think for his age, I mean, the signs are there that he's a legend in the making, really. And you said so
yeah.
when we are
And,
discussing
and
it.
and
This
once again,
guy has
it seems
years
like
ahead of him.
yeah, and it seems like these cars are treating Hamilton better. He has the stability he needs to be confident negotiate, but we have to remember these are slow corners. So we'll see what he can do on tracks of high speed corners. But he seems to be very confident, especially in that snail. I call it like the snails meandering corners in sector one, and then also in the even in the traction zones in and the technical corners in sector two. Hamilton did a slightly better job than Leclerc, slightly more stable, and he's now getting confident in braking later. Um, and he just seems like he just has a little bit more polishing than Leclerc. But it's very close because Leclerc was only zero point 0.1 something seconds behind him, and we know that Leclerc um, tends to be someone who can pull a fantastic lap at any time. But we saw this coming because you saw I've been predicting this earlier, Falabi. What are your thoughts? Yeah.
Yeah, I thought
That Hamilton would do well on the track because of the technical nature of it and because of the very tight corners. And Leclerc is prone to sometimes overdriving and these things, especially with the pointy car. Go ahead. Mhm.
yeah, basically, I think Hamilton did very well here. And if you look at the way he's driving now, it looks to be a little bit more measured. You know, the performance of the car too really helped him here because I mean Ferrari's I think it was the turbocharger design, which is smaller, helped
Yeah,
helped the clipping. The turbocharger, smaller turbocharger design helped to fight against clipping, and it also helps the initial acceleration out of the corners, especially in turn 16. And so this kind of profile kind of helps Hamilton a lot more than, Leclerc. And he's able to find his juice and is a bit more set. And like we said before the season starts, they had to redesign the cabin and many things to suit what is used to, in his Mercedes days, the design of the steering and everything. So he seems to be more comfortable. I think that's
yeah.
just
His
what it
setup
is.
is a little bit more. His setup is more stable than
More stable,
Leclerc's.
exactly.
But I'm going to call you out on one thing. Actually, the turbocharger causes more clipping for Ferrari relative to Mercedes. So we'll get to the next part and where the differences are. So I'll deal with that issue first. It has a smaller turbo, which gives it boosts coming off the corners and even some traction and acceleration coming into the corners. Okay, it does have more power, but because its turbo is smaller, it has less capacity over a whole race, and it does die out halfway
Oh,
through the
sure.
corners.
Over long
And,
distances. That's
yeah,
true.
and now during the corners, it helps it. So the turbo helps you during the cornering, but on the straights, and that was where the difference was because Ferrari and Lewis Hamilton was faster in sectors 1 and 2 than 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 the Mercedes drivers, but was losing 3/10 of a second on the straights, and that's where they lost all the time because Mercedes has a larger turbo and more capacity, and I dare say probably has better mapping out strategy for the whole race too. So
That's
this goes back to what we're seeing: the tortoise versus the hare. The Ferrari is a tortoise. It jumps out like a greyhound at the beginning, but then it holds on for power. Or like Carlos versus Ben Johnson. Ben Johnson, first 30 meters, you get my point.
yeah.
But then
And I
it catch
think this
that,
jumping out will be crucial tomorrow. This jumping out
yeah.
will be
Well,
crucial
yeah, because
tomorrow.
we saw in the sprint race, Ferrari is jumping out, and also because of its smaller turbo, it has a fantastic start. So Ferrari has outstarted Mercedes 2 weeks in a row. But what happens is that Mercedes race mapping comes into play after about 10 laps. Because even in the sprint race, Hamilton jumped out and was leading, but as the race went on, Mercedes energy recovery system, which is more superior, or which is superior, not more superior, is superior. More superior would be if I'm superior to him, yes, but I'm more superior than you are to him. I'm just getting into some talking. The Italians don't know that shit. But anyway, that difference in managing in endurance and in energy recovery system is what's now giving Mercedes the advantage. And if Ferrari can continue to double down on their power at the starts of races and stuff, and also improve their energy recovery system and endurance. This is this this is not going to be. This is going to be like McLaren last year. They were the best car, but Red Bull gave them a run for their money and came 2 points. So definitely you're going to see Mercedes probably winning the constructors no matter what this year. But you will see Hamilton and Leclerc win a race or two this year, and they might even by the middle of the year be the best team on the grid. Let's quickly talk about Red Bull. Not much to say about Red Bull. The car is undrivable. There's a problem and its undrivability is not through mechanical grip problems. The undrivability is through the software and everything, so that the surges in the car and the behavior of the car electrically and how it deploys energy is unpredictable. So the driver basically feels like he's skating on ice because he doesn't feel connected to the track. One last thing I'd also add is that Ferrari has apparently the best chassis on the grid. They have a better chassis than Mercedes, so they're getting better traction, which is scary because I thought that Mercedes would have better traction. So it seems like Mercedes' main advantage now is just that it might have a slightly more powerful ICE, but it's actually just the software. That's the main thing, and the software is what's hurting back Red Bull. Last thoughts on these two thoughts, and we're out of here. Follow me.
You're absolutely right, Mustafa. I think the issue is with the software deployment maps. You could see that Max was struggling to use the lift and coast, basically to get more juice for manual override mode in the subsequent laps. So I think there is survival mode there. Basically, the Ford power unit is struggling in harvesting energy. And in a kind of track like this, you need a lot of energy deployment and harvesting. You should be able to top up battery easily, but this clipping thing, you have to revisit the software deployment map. The algorithms have to be retweaked and they have to do it quickly because the longer it goes, the more irritated Max Verstappen gets. Because, I mean, as an F1 driver, if you have a machine that you feel like pushing and the machine is not responding the way you want, it can be very, very annoying. I can imagine his mindset right now.
So he's frustrated, and I'm frustrated. And to be honest with you, it doesn't do service to F1. That if we want to see Verstappen lose, we want to see him losing because they either didn't make a good car based on mechanical, classical foundations of
Yes, not
engineering,
because
not
of
because
regulation change.
the regular change where all this stuff is electrical, where the software now has become the champion of the whole thing. It's really bad. It makes me lose a little bit of energy when I'm doing these shows too, because this isn't the F1 I signed in for. I don't care about Verstappen losing or anything, but what I want to see is some real driver. I want to see racing where people do braking. This thing is punishing good drivers. Look at McLaren. McLaren is not even up there. There's a lot of it has to do with software.
And I feel
You're punishing guys.
By the time Red Bull fix this problem, even though they might perform better, I don't think Verstappen as an F1 driver would enjoy driving anymore because
No, I could see him leaving because
he's
he's
counter
such a
what he likes.
he's so fanatical about racing that if he's not racing, even if he's winning, he's going to walk away from this sport. And funny enough, Russell's the perfect person for this sport because Russell is partly technical and also a good driver. But Russell likes all this. He's a geek. He likes all this electrical deployment bullshit.
For
So,
sure.
you see.
Just a
But
science
anyway,
student.
So we're done. We'll be back for tomorrow's race. Take us out, Afolabi.
Okay, it's been another brilliant F1 show. Shout out to Kimi Antonelli, a brilliant
Yeah.
performance. Paul, the sky is not his limit.
Actually, I need money. Send me money,
Performances.
please.
He did very well. And for myself
Yeah.
and Mustafa, we'll be back again.
Can you imagine 18-year-old kid chilling, man? Yeah.